Marinero, welcome. It's the Sick Podcast, NHL Trade Deadline Edition, along with Dave Pagnotta, my NHL insider of the fourthperiod.com. How you doing, bud?
Not too bad, man. How's it going? Thanks for having me.
Going extremely well. Thanks for doing this. Anytime we talk trades, you know that you're one of the first people that I call and I contact. So once again, thank you. This is going to be a treat for all hockey fans. It is Sunday night, April 11th. Trade deadline day is Monday, April 12th at 3 p.m. officially. Of course, there's some trades that end up coming in after 3 p.m. with all the paperwork being done and all that stuff. But Dave, this is a different kind of trade deadline day. Why? Well, with the pandemic being what it is, usually NHL teams, front offices, they gather in what is called a war room where they're all together. And this year, it's a lot different, of course. Everyone is doing it from their own place in their own home and stuff like that. I'm sure they have means of communication. It's a little bit different. Of course, we know that cap implications are different with teams wanting to take on salary. It is a gate-driven league for the most part. There are no fans in the stands for the most part. There's no money coming in. And so there are a lot of teams that are reluctant to take on salary. And we're seeing that when teams put players on waivers, if those players have not only salary but term, Dave, they don't get picked up.
Yeah, it's you're right. It's a totally different year. It's the economics of everything have complicated things leading up to, not just the deadline, but trying to plan even beyond that into the offseason for teams that are pretty much out of it. It's been a big challenge. And even like you said, dealing with this now, you got a GM in one office, you got his AGM in his home. It makes things a lot more complicated. But we're seeing a little bit of activity. We're seeing more as we get closer to the deadline on Monday at 3 p.m. Eastern. So it's, you get a little bit of excitement here, but everything is taken into account, especially on the dollars and cents. And, you got to make sure that, as you mentioned, gate-driven league, you got to make sure that your projections are crisp if you're going to be spending some extra cash in these next few hours here.
All right, we will get to the Montreal Canadiens. Of course, we're in Montreal, and a lot of Canadiens fans want to know what the Canadiens are going to do, if they're going to do anything. They did make a move earlier on today. They acquired defenseman John Merrill from the Detroit Red Wings, which we are going to get to. Some of the big names that were being talked about, all right? David Savard has already been traded. Nick Foligno has already been traded. Let's take a look at the activity that's taken place this weekend and take a look at the trade tracker, of course. The Florida Panthers acquired defenseman Brandon Montour. In exchange, the Buffalo Sabres got a 2021 third-round pick. That happened this weekend. Dave, it's only normal that Buffalo, who's not going to make the playoffs, are going to be a seller, and it's only normal they'd rather get prospects and or draft picks in return.
Yeah, exactly. And as we wait on the next domino to fall in Buffalo, it could be Taylor Hall, could be Linus Ullmark. He's a UFA at the end of the season. They tried to get him to sign a contract extension with the club. Not happening, not right now, from what I'm being told. He's going to test the waters as a free agent. So now Buffalo has a decision to make. Do they want to move the goalie? Do they not want to move him? Do they want to take their chances? He's going to test the waters regardless. So we may see Ullmark be another guy that's moved out of Buffalo, and they got to figure out what's going on with Hall, Rasmus Ristolainen, Colin Miller. All of these guys are getting some attention as well. It's going to be busy, no question, for the Buffalo Sabres. But you're right. I mean, the money is an issue for a lot of teams. Mm-hmm. And the Buffalo Sabres want to recoup not only the money, but as many picks and futures as they can get.
Okay, while we're on the Buffalo Sabres, you just mentioned Taylor Hall. He was the big free agent splash signing. It caught a lot of people by surprise that he ended up signing a 1-year deal. Everyone thought that this guy was going on a 6-year deal, a 7-year deal in unrestricted free agency. Because of the pandemic, because of teams not wanting to spend, not a lot of teams were interested in giving him the money that he wanted for the term that he wanted. So he took a chance on himself and he bet on himself. It really doesn't look like that was the good move right now, Dave. He's got a couple of goals. He's got less than 20 points. Nevertheless, he's a player that a lot of teams would want to acquire because A, no one's looked good in Buffalo this season. And B, this guy's going to be playing for a contract. So he has everything to prove the rest of the way and what he hopes to be a long playoff push. Not going to happen in Buffalo. They're not going to lose him for nothing. He's not going to re-sign with the Buffalo Sabres. He has $8 million on the salary. With it being close to the end of the season, of course, teams are not on the hook for that. Buffalo is willing to pay a part of the salary if teams are up against the cap. Dave Pagnotta of the fourth period, what are you hearing?
Yeah, well, it looks like they're going to eat about half of that, retain half. And we're seeing this trend. Like Columbus did it with Savard and with Foligno. They ate half of their salaries. They got a third team to come in to eat another quarter of it. It looks like if Hall's getting traded or when Hall gets traded, and it could be very soon, it's going to be half. So you're looking at $4 million at most that you're going to have to bring onto your salary cap. So we'll see exactly how this kind of unfolds. And I keep looking down because I keep getting messages every now and again. But it looks like Taylor Hall might be going actually pretty quickly here. So we'll see exactly how this transpires. But they want to recoup, as you said, as much as you can here. Washington is in on the mix, as are the Colorado Avalanche, Minnesota to a certain extent. But you got to keep in mind, Hall also has a no movement clause, so he can dictate where he wants to go. As part of all of this. So we'll see how this kind of unfolds. But it looks like, based on my phone kind of blowing up here in the last little bit, it looks like we may get some action on Hall in pretty short order here, possibly even while we're still on.
All right, well, that'd be cool. It's the Sick Podcast, and it's brought to you by MyBookie. Use code SICKPICKS for a 50% deposit bonus. Bet, win, get paid. You can place your bets on mybookie.ag. I'm Marinaro. It's the Sick Podcast, along with David Pagnotta of the fourth period, who's taking a look at his phone. I am too. It's okay. I think we're allowed to do that. All right, back to the trade tracker we go. The San Jose Sharks, they acquire a fifth-round pick and defenseman Greg Patterin. The Colorado Avalanche acquire goalie Devin Dubnyk. And this is a goalie who's had ups and downs, but if he gets hot, we know he's a big guy, Dave. If he gets hot, he could be as hot as a firecracker.
Yeah, and that's what Colorado wanted. They wanted to make sure that they can, if there's a scenario, and we saw this in the past, where goaltenders, you need two. Nowadays, you need three because of all the games that are being played. You got to roll with the hot hand. And Dubnyk's a guy, Vezina candidate. He's a guy that certainly knows what it takes to win. Rough situation for him. Going to San Jose, thought he was going to be able to rebound, just didn't work. But Colorado brings in a guy that kind of solidifies their positioning between the pipes. And if they have to, go to him, they feel more comfortable with a veteran who's also a good guy in the room versus, Jonas Johansson, who they got from Buffalo, who had a shutout the other night. But you get that veteran presence, especially in the playoffs, that's so important for a lot of teams. And Colorado checked that one off their list because that was something they really wanted to do before the deadline, and they were able to accomplish it. And I believe Dubnyk's with the team right now as their plan. I think he made it to wherever they are, if they're Denver or wherever.
All right, okay. It's the Sick Podcast. It's NHL Trade Deadline live show. I'm Marinaro. He's David Pagnotta of the fourth period. We are live on Facebook, on the Facebook page of the Sick Podcast. If you have questions, throw them out there. We're going to try and get to them. And like it and share it with your friends. Jerry has a question. Why don't we get to it? I know we said we'd talk Habs a little bit later, but Jerry says, who would you give away from the Montreal Canadiens roster? Dave, out of all the Montreal Canadiens players, are there names that are in play?
There were before Brendan Gallagher went down. Arturi Lehkonen was a guy, because he's got, a $2.4 million cap hit, something like that. It looked like the Canadiens were willing to move that out in order to bring in some bodies. I haven't heard too much lately in terms of guys moving out because they have a little bit of extra cap flexibility because of Gallagher going on LTIR. But if they're willing to move him then, it means that they would be willing to move him now if the right deal kind of presented itself. So they got John Merrill. They solidified, at least for now anyway, they feel they solidified their defensive core because they wanted somebody like him. They were in on him for a little bit. I'm curious to see if Bergevin is just kind of waiting in the weeds, trying to see if something pops up. And because, we're seeing so many guys fall off the board already today, we may see some players that may move tomorrow for cheaper than what's going out today. I could see Bergevin kind of taking that into account and possibly pouncing if the opportunity pops up.
And that question regarding which Montreal Canadiens players are in play here was courtesy of Jerry Zontiras. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Jerry, thank you very much for sending us that question. Marinaro, the Sick Podcast. It should be noted for those who missed it earlier today, the Montreal Canadiens placed defenseman Victor Mete on waivers. We found out earlier on in the season, probably about a month into the season, that Mette's agent had requested a trade from the Montreal Canadiens. Mette was on a 1-year deal, wasn't getting into the Montreal Canadiens lineup. He has, as of late, of course, with the Ben Sherratt injury, but his agent would have liked to have gone to another team, play more often, try and show his worth, and probably end up getting a long-term contract because his contract is up at the end of the year. By placing him on waivers, Dave Pagnotta, the Canadiens were trying to get some cap flexibility, of course. And with the addition of John Merrill, it just goes to show you that if Mette gets picked up tomorrow by noon, the Canadiens are okay. They're okay with that.
Yeah, they are. They got options, right? Because he's, his money goes down to the farm club or to the taxi squad. There's no cap hit against it. And Merrill's only $925,000. So it's not like you're bringing in a $2-3 million player by any stretch. So it makes things a little bit easier for the Canadiens moving forward because, the waiver wire is at noon. So they'll have 3 hours, roughly, really 2.5, to try to make another move if they need to, if Mette's either picked up or not. Now, it sounds like there's some interest in Victor Mete as a freebie, so we'll see if he ends up getting plucked on waivers. But the Canadiens felt that they wanted a more experienced presence there. Merrill, of course, was on a run with Vegas, so he's got that playoff experience too. I think this is a good ad for them. Obviously, not the star power that a lot of fans may want.
Yeah.
But he's a sturdy guy. He was playing 19 minutes in Detroit. So, and he was a plus, Tony, so on Detroit. So that's tough to do. So he's a sturdy guy in the back end, but not obviously that star presence.
The Columbus Blue Jackets and David Savard, as a matter of fact, the Columbus Blue Jackets have several players that you would think would interest teams down the stretch here. They're in 7th place in the Central. To make the playoffs, you have to be in the top 4. As we speak, they're 7 points behind the 4th place Nashville Predators, who have a game in hand. So the Columbus Blue Jackets have decided that, it's not going to work out this year. We are going to become a seller. And as it turns out, David Savard is no longer a Columbus Blue Jacket. A trade that has him going to the Red Wings. In the end, the Red Wings end up making a deal. He ends up at Tampa Bay Lightning. Break it down for us, Dave Pagnotta.
Well, look, Tampa got very creative here because they've been looking at bringing in a top 4 defenseman for some time, but they needed to make the money work. So in order for that to happen, they brought in Detroit. Detroit eats a quarter of his overall salary. Columbus eats half of it. So Tampa's only on the hook for 1.0625, whatever it is. And because they have so much, or so tiny bit of cap flexibility, they put Jan Ruda on LTIR. So now they're cap compliant. It cost them a 1st-round pick and a 4th, but they were able to make this happen to solidify their defensive core. And if you're a team like the Tampa Bay Lightning, you're just coming off a Stanley Cup championship, you feel you've got enough to rebound and to go back-to-back.
Yeah.
Remember, you got Kucherov coming back in the playoffs. So this is a stacked team. They wanted to bring in a sturdy, reliable guy on that back end because of how much pressure is going to be in their defensive zone in front of Andrei Vasilevsky. So this was a smart move, certainly by Tampa. They crept up in the last few weeks trying to make this happen. We're able to get Detroit in the mix to make the money work.
Tampa Bay also acquires defenseman Brian Lashoff, and in return, the Columbus Blue Jackets, in exchange for Savard and Lashoff, end up getting a 2021 first-round pick, a 2021 fourth-round pick, and a 2022 third-round pick. There were a couple of other deals. We'll get to the Canadiens acquiring John Merrill in just a second. Probably the biggest of the day being the Toronto Maple Leafs acquiring forward Nick Foligno. Here you have a guy who is a captain. Here you have a guy who's a leader. Here's a guy who has a lot of playoff experience. And in return, the Columbus Blue Jackets get a 2021 first-round pick and a fourth-round pick in 2022. How do you like this trade for the Toronto Maple Leafs?
I love it. This is a player, a type of player that Toronto has needed for a long time. A physical guy. He'll go into the corners. He'll get in front of the net. He'll throw the body around. And, he's a guy capable of playing top 6 minutes. And we saw this. And Toronto saw this firsthand last year in the bubble when they played Columbus, and Foligno was just all over them. And that's the kind of guy you need, especially come playoff time. The Canadiens have some of those types of players. Toronto doesn't really have that. So for the Leafs, it was key to get this guy in there because of the type of player he is. He's also a heck of a leader. He's a great guy, strong in the room. He's motivated to go. Right before this, he's speaking to the media saying that he's excited to be part of the Maple Leafs. He felt that his this is where his heart should have taken him. And we'll see exactly, how he performs. He's got to quarantine for 7 days. But this was a really good move for the Maple Leafs, and a team that's going all in. They gave up the first-round pick. They gave up a couple fourth-round picks as well. Similar situation to Savard. Columbus eats half his salary. They got San Jose to come in to eat a quarter of it. So Toronto's only on the hook for a quarter of his $5.5 million cap hit. So definitely strategic in regard and very clever, but also very shrewd in trying to bring in a guy who can not only play the wing, but he can play the center position as well. So it gives Toronto a little bit of flexibility in how they're going to match up against opponents come playoff time.
It's the Sick Podcast. We're live on Facebook. Like it and share it with your friends. Here's a question coming in from Jordan. Is Kyle Dubas done after acquiring Nick Foligno, or is something else brewing in Toronto? Dave Pagnotta?
I think they're still looking. I wouldn't be surprised if they bring in a depth defenseman, because you could always use one of those guys, but also the goaltending market. Toronto's been looking around for a goalie, not to replace Freddie Anderson by any stretch, but to bring in somebody, because they're expecting Freddie to come back by the end of the regular season. So they'll have Anderson and Jack Campbell, who's just been electric. But they want somebody else to come in case somebody gets hurt. I don't believe there's too much confidence in Michael Hutchinson. So if they can get a better goaltender to come in as a third string and play some games as well, or at least backup down the stretch going into the postseason, I think that's what they'd like to do.
The Montreal Canadiens have lost 4 of their last 5 games in what looked like was going to be a lock to make the playoffs this year, because Vancouver and Calgary were off the mark. Now, all of a sudden, Canadiens fans are a little nervous. The Calgary Flames are 6 points behind. Yes, the Flames have played 3 more games than the Montreal Canadiens, but the Vancouver Canucks are 8 points behind the Canadiens, and the Canucks have a game in hand. Now, the Canucks and the Canadiens are not going to play each other anymore this season, but Calgary and Montreal are going to play each other 5 more times. And I repeat, the Canadiens have lost 4 of their last 5, including 5-0 loss to the Winnipeg Jets last night. They acquired John Merrill earlier this afternoon from the Detroit Red Wings in exchange for a 5th-round pick in 2021 and forward Hayden Verbeek. Let's talk about Merrill. Depth defenseman, third pairing, correct?
Yeah. He's a number 5 and number 6 defenseman. But as I mentioned earlier, this is a guy that was playing 19, 20 minutes a night for the Detroit Red Wings. He was a plus player. He's versatile. He's strong. He can play both sides. He's got experience down the stretch into the playoffs, playing with Vegas as well. This was a strong move. And again, the cap hit also plays a factor. It's under $1 million. But this was a strong ad for the Montreal Canadiens. Again, not a star power presence, but you need these types of players, especially down the stretch, especially in the playoffs. You need the unsung heroes. And John Merrill has all the attributes of that type of a player for a playoff contending team. So I like the move. You didn't give up a lot. Hayden goes to Detroit. His dad's, I believe, the assistant GM there, Pat Verbeek, former NHLer. So this was, I think, a good move again for the Canadiens. You didn't give up much. You still have a lot of cap flexibility. And again, if an opportunity pops up, I think Marc Bergevin may pounce.
Let's talk about some teams that it looks like are definitely not going to make the playoffs. You would think that those teams are going to have players that other teams are going to want. The Anaheim Ducks.
Yeah.
What's going on in Anaheim?
The Ducks are pretty much wide open. They've got, they don't have too many guys on expiring contracts, but they have players with term on their deal that they're willing to move. Rickard Rakell, Hampus Lindholm, who's hurt right now. I believe he's about a week or so away from coming back. He fractured his wrist. So he's about a week or so away from hitting the ice again to start practicing. Josh Manson is another player, another guy with 1 year left on his deal. All 3 guys do. And then you've got guys with a little more term that they would like to move, but Tony, I don't know if they're going to. Adam Henrique and Jakob Silverberg, they've got 3 or 4 years left on their deals, big contracts, big money. I don't expect that to happen now. But the Ducks are willing to make some moves, and they've been very active in the last couple of weeks and try to make that happen, at least building up a market for their guys. They're asking for a first-round pick and part of a package for all 3 of the guys on 1-year deals, Lindholm, Rakell, and Josh Manson. I don't know if they'll get it for all 3, but there's a lot of interest in these players, and if they can get some near NHL-ready players, somebody that can step in right away, I think we could see something happen there out of Anaheim. They look to shake things up.
I'm Marinaro. It's the Sick Podcast. Go to sportbuffshop.com for all of your officially licensed sports apparel and more. Use code SICKHOODIES for 15% off on all your hoodies of all your favorite teams. I want to go back to Columbus for a second because I'm taking a look at the Central. Columbus already traded. They're already selling off. You would think they're going to do more. What are the chances? Two guys in particular have really been in the doghouse this season since being acquired. Max Domi is one. Patrick Laine is the other. Do you expect either of them to go between now and 3 p.m. tomorrow?
Laine, no. I checked in on that, and teams have asked about Patrick Laine and have inquired and said, well, he hasn't done that well lately. Would you consider moving him? The answer right now is no. I think they want to reset with him. I don't believe John Tortorella will be back next season. He's a free agent. His contract expires as a head coach. They'll have a new coach come in. So I'm not expecting that. Max Domi is available. And my understanding is Max isn't overly thrilled with being in Columbus right now. He would welcome a change. It hasn't worked out. He's got 1 year left on his contract. But if they move him, they don't want to just move him and sell him off. They want to kind of include him in a package in a hockey type trade, talent for talent kind of thing. Now with 1 year left before he's a UFA, it might be a little bit difficult, but I would be surprised, especially if he's there beyond his current contract. It looks like Domi will be, they may try to move him by the deadline. It might be difficult. We may see something in the offseason take place there.
What else going on in Detroit, who are dead last in the Central?
I'm expecting Luke Glendening, a serviceable bottom six center, to move. He's one of the best faceoff guys in the league. He's got a low cap hit. I believe it's $1.8 million.
That is correct.
So he's a guy that's got, low hit and a sturdy, one of those, character type of players. Go in, win a faceoff, get your butt off the ice, let the offensive guys take over. He's comfortable with that. Darren Helm's another guy, veteran player.
Dave, if I could just get back to Glendening in a second here. Over 60% in the circle, and his contract is up at the end of the year, so he can only help your organization with key faceoffs down the stretch.
Exactly. And teams that need that extra presence, they're going to look to him. There's no question. The Canadiens kicked around a little bit, but obviously Eric Stahl's part of the equation now. Toronto did as well to a certain extent. They bring in Riley Nash, who'll come playoff time. But there are other teams that would love to get him. I think Edmonton has looked at him as a possibility as well. Darren Helm, another guy, veteran player, won a cup with Detroit and is going to be a UFA this offseason as well. He'd welcome a change. I don't know what the market is for him right now, but that's another player that they're looking to move. They have Jonathan Bernier. They have Mark Stahl. Both of these guys are UFAs, goalie and a defenseman. Stahl would like to move. They would have to eat probably half of his salary, is just over $5 million, 5.2, something like that on a cap hit. But Bernier's another guy who's actually had a pretty good season for Detroit, all things considered, where he's at. But you can see some teams like Washington kind of kick the tires there and see if they can bring him in as basically a backup or 1B type goalie.
Well, speaking of Washington, of course, they're on top, tied with the Islanders in the Mass Mutual East. I'll tell you who's not on top are the Devils and the Sabres, who are 7th and 8th. They're at the bottom. We already talked about the Buffalo Sabres. It's expected that Taylor Hall, who makes $8 million and has a 1 year deal, this is the end of his contract, has underachieved this season. It's expected that he will be dealt between now and tomorrow's 3 p.m. NHL trade deadline. The New Jersey Devils, what do they have to offer?
They've got a couple defensemen. They had three, but Sami Vatanen went on waivers today, and they tried to move him. Obviously, there wasn't much of a market, or at least they felt there wasn't. But they have Ryan Murray, and they've got Dmitry Kulikov on the back end that they're willing to move. Both of the guys are free agents at the end of the season. They're both lefty. I believe there was some discussion with Boston before Palmieri was traded to the Islanders. I believe the Devils and Bruins were discussing a deal that involved Palmieri and Kulikov. Obviously, didn't happen, but I think they've circled back on Kulikov to see what the price tag may be. He's got a low cap hit as well. But those are two guys to look for that could possibly move. Now, again, for teams looking for goaltending for that third string, they have Aaron Dell and Scott Wedgwood that are UFAs at the end of the season as well. They've gotten some questions or some inquiries about them as well. I think up front, they've got Miles Wood, but I think they'd like to keep Woods. He's got a year left on his deal. But I suspect that Murray and Kulikov certainly will be moved by the 3 p.m. deadline on Monday.
On to the Montreal Canadiens we go. The Canadiens, of course, have placed Victor Mete on waivers. They acquired defenseman John Merrill, a depth defenseman, a third-pairing defenseman, earlier today from the Detroit Red Wings. The team has lost 4 of their last 5 games. What looked to be a lock to make the playoffs, and look, they're still in pretty good shape. There's no doubt about it. They are ahead of the Calgary Flames and ahead of the Vancouver Canucks. They're ahead of Calgary by 6. They're ahead of Vancouver by 8. Mind you, Vancouver has a game in hand on the Canadiens, and the Canadiens face Calgary 5 times between now and the end of the season. Things have really turned in terms of the fans' appreciation or lack thereof for Jonathan Drouin, who over the last little while here has had some really, really poor efforts. And those poor efforts, and now all of a sudden a lot more attention is being brought to the fact that 5 players on this team have more points than Drouin. 13 players on this team have more goals than Drouin. Drouin is the worst plus-minus player on the team, and he also plays on the same team as 36-year-old Eric Staal, who a couple of weeks ago was acquired from probably the worst team in hockey. Drouin has 2 years left on his contract at the end of this season with a modified no-trade clause, but it's only a couple of teams that we're talking about. Yeah. Dave Pagnotta, do you think there's a market for Jonathan Drouin? Do you think other teams are interested in him? And more importantly, do you think the Canadiens would be ready to trade him?
I think they would be willing to, but I think this would be very complicated to pull off unless they've been talking about this and keeping it tremendously under wraps for the last several weeks. This is probably something that would be reconsidered in the offseason. I think, there are only a handful of untouchables or close to untouchables, I believe, on the Montreal Canadiens. Like Jonathan Drouin is not one of them. If the right deal comes into play, they would be willing to move him. That being said, if you're going to move him, the mindset would be, well, you're going to get the better player in the deal because you're going to have to package Jonathan Drouin for, somebody who can slot in on the left side on a top line. It's going to be difficult to do that ahead of the deadline, but there will be some options, I believe, in the offseason if the Canadiens want to go in that direction. I think for now, it's a matter of trying to inject some confidence in Drouin, and it's difficult to do sometimes. There's no question. We've seen this over the years. He gets down on himself. It's not working. He loses that confidence. He can't regain it just like that. And a lot of guys have that issue, but it seems to be prolonged with Jonathan Drouin. He's a good talent. There's no question. But when he gets into those funks, it just takes so long to get out of it. And the Canadiens are in a position, or just about to be in a position, where they can't afford for that to be game on game on game on game. So we'll see how this kind of goes. I don't expect, again, anything to happen before tomorrow's deadline. I'd be pretty surprised if it does. But if things don't work out for the Canadiens this season and doesn't work out for Jonathan Drouin, I would believe that they're going to explore their options in the summer.
I'm Marinaro, the quick podcast. I'm in Montreal. He's Dave Pagnotta from the fourthperiod.com. He is in Toronto, and there is a big Boston Bruins fan base that is watching us as we speak. The Boston Bruins, it looks like they're going to make the playoffs, you would think. They're 4 points ahead of the Philadelphia Flyers for that 4th and final playoff spot in the Mass Mutual East. They do have 3 games in hand on the Flyers, but the Bruins are looking for goals. There have been a shortage of goals on this team. Take a look at the Washington Capitals, who are first. They've scored 30 more goals than Boston. The New York Islanders, who usually don't score a lot of goals, have scored 14 more. The Pittsburgh Penguins have scored 33 more goals. The Bruins are looking for offense. Do you see them acquiring an offensive player?
They want to, Tony. They really do. They came close. They thought they were close on Palmieri. Didn't happen. They re-engaged in Taylor Hall, and we'll see pretty soon, I believe, what happens with Taylor Hall. They were in on him. They explored the market on Foligno. I believe, they're a team similar to Edmonton, where they don't want to give up a first-round pick for a rental, which will make it difficult based on the prices that are being paid right now. There was a first given out to Palmieri. There was a first for Foligno. Mm-hmm. It sounds like there's going to be a first involved for Taylor Hall. We'll see based on the other deals. So if Boston wants to be in on that, you got to either cough up the first-round pick or you got to get creative in trying to find other options. They've explored Rickard Rakell as a possibility in going back to him in Anaheim. I think there could be some type of solution there, but we'll see. They have a bit of a history in trading together, so we'll see if they can come to terms on something. But Boston's looking. Yeah. It's just been tough, Tony, as you can imagine. It just hasn't worked out. And the fan base, I've got a lot of family that are Bruins fans as well. They're pretty ticked off, and I understand why.
So in a couple of minutes here, let's do a couple of speed questions, all right? Let's take a look at teams who probably believe they have a solid chance to win the Stanley Cup this year. Colorado, what are they looking for? What do they need? What are you hearing?
Yeah, well, they got their goaltender. If anything, they're either going to go in on Hall if it's a lower price than overall, because remember, it's a first and a prospect is what they're looking for.
Yep.
So if that lowers, I can see them going after him because they almost signed him. He was the backup plan effectively in the offseason. It was a 1-year deal, either $5 or $5.5 million. So I can see Colorado either going there if the price drops. Otherwise, maybe look to another depth type of addition to this team because they already got their goalie.
Vegas
is hamstrung. They don't have any cap space. So unless they're going to move out a body, I really don't see them doing too much. They were looking at a player like bringing Merrill back because his cap hit was under $1 million. So if there's someone in and around that $1 million range from a depth perspective, I can see them looking at that possibility, but it also may result in some bodies going out. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if they stand pat.
Carolina.
They want a defenseman. They're trying. They're in on Manson. They were in on Savard, but they prefer a guy that can be part of it. Their mix beyond these playoffs in this season. You know, they scratched Hayden Fleury. That raised some eyebrows the other night. They're expecting to include him in some type of deal. It looks like they will get a defenseman, a right shot defenseman. It's just a matter of who it's going to be. But Manson's a guy to certainly watch out for there. Florida's an interesting one because, they signed Nikita Gusev today. They bring in Montour, as you mentioned yesterday. They still have some cap flexibility. I think they're in a similar position to Colorado. If the prices drop, they could kind of get into that mix. They were in on Hall earlier. I think they kind of took a couple steps back there, but we'll see exactly if they engage. But again, if the prices drop, I think Florida would take a look at adding again, but they seem pretty comfortable now.
Ever since the Pittsburgh Penguins drafted Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin, they go all in every year. You would expect this year is going to be no different. Pittsburgh.
They're looking at depth guys. They inquired about Foligno to a certain extent, but they'd love to be in a position to bring in somebody on that top six, primarily on the second unit. Mm-hmm. But they're a little depleted in terms of prospects and draft picks. They don't have a first, a second, and a fourth, I believe, or they got a second or a third. I can't remember, but they're missing 3 of the top 4 rounds. They don't have a deep prospect pool, so it's going to be a little bit difficult. But because of the marketplace this year, I could see them making some moves for some depth pieces. They'd love to be able to upgrade their defense, but it might be a little bit complicated ahead of the deadline.
In ending here on the Montreal Canadiens, 2 more questions, but Danault's contract is up at the end of the year. Tatar's contract is up at the end of the year. Armia's contract is up at the end of the year. Do you see the Montreal Canadiens moving any of those players at the risk of maybe losing them at the end of the year for nothing if they can't get them signed?
I think they'll hang tight with these guys. They obviously like what they bring in the room. They like what they bring overall. The other thing to keep into consideration here is the expansion draft. I would rather, if you've got some kind of understanding that you're going to figure out something after the draft, you don't want to necessarily sign them beforehand because then you're forcing yourself to protect them. Yeah. So we'll see exactly what happens here with the Canadiens. On that front, I think both sides had an understanding on Danault anyway that after the season started they were going to wait until the playoffs until the offseason, the playoffs were done before they reconvened on contract negotiations. Sounds like it'll be the same thing with the other guys. They'd like to keep them, but we'll ultimately see how that unfolds. I'd be surprised if any of those guys are moved. We'll end
with this. If the Montreal Canadiens acquire one player between now and the 3 p.m. deadline tomorrow, who will it be and where do you think Taylor Hall will go?
I think, and I may have a quick update here, nothing yet. But there are 2 teams that are pushing, it seems like, from my phone blowing up. The Islanders have circled back on Hall, and the Washington Capitals are in on that. So we'll keep tabs on that to see where that goes. As far as the Canadiens, it's tough to say. I think if as I mentioned, if a price drops for one of the top guys, like Taylor Hall, for example, I think the Canadiens would pounce. I don't think it'll happen because it sounds like that's going to be figured out tonight. Mm-hmm. So I don't really have a name for you. I knew Merrill, I thought for sure. I don't really have a name for you at this stage, unless, again, prices drop. I think the Canadiens will kind of lurk in the weeds and see if it does happen.
If there's no real name, that means possibly that their cap situation is so bad and the Montreal Canadiens will not be able to pull off anything between now and tomorrow. This was it. It was NHL Trade Deadline Live. The deadline, of course, is tomorrow, Monday, April 12th at 3 p.m. He is Dave Pagnotta of the Fourth Period. I'm Marinaro. You can listen to us on all social media platforms, and you can watch us on Facebook and Instagram at The Sick Podcast. Like it and share it with your friends. Dave Pagnotta, thanks for doing this, man. Have a great NHL trade deadline.
I can't wait. Hopefully tomorrow's exciting, Tony.
Thank you to all those who listened and all those who watched.